Says I'm live, so I'm here. And a lot of other people are already here over in the comment section. So thanks a lot for being here on time. Makes a big difference. And I don't have to send anyone to the office for a late slip. So bonus. So hello and happy Friday. This is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers episode number 264 live edition because it's the last Friday in June. So I'm glad that everybody's here. Feel free to talk over in the comment section. I guess it's over there on your screen, probably. And I know you want to know what's going on outside here. It's a beautiful day out there. It's a miracle that I'm inside right now. So it is 79 degrees Fahrenheit. I forgot to look up what that is in Celsius, but it's a nice warm day and it's going to be rainy tomorrow. So this is a day to be out there working your bees, not sitting here live on some YouTube live stream. This is going to remain, by the way, long after we do the live. We did have some rain here, not the rain that a lot of other people are getting. Dams coming apart and failing and things like that. So people are either getting rained out or they're dry. It's weird. I'm lucky enough not to be in one of these tough areas. But we have rain tomorrow in the northeastern United States and the state of Pennsylvania. So today's the day to get out there and work with your bees. So you probably want to know what the bees are on right now. So the bees are on white clover in my meadows around here. I highly recommend letting your yards and fields grow up until the clover can blossom. Let the bees use them a little bit. And then if you're going to mow them later in the evening and when the bees are off of them. So hold the phone. Anita is already asking a question. Quick question, Fred. Have you had time to review the entrance from Erica? Forgot what it's called. Okay, so that's Erica for Best for Bees, and she's in Canada, and they have that really dynamic plastic entrance, which is a great way to put direct fed microbials on your bees and things like that. But and they have modified entrances too. So if you look up Erica, I did do an interview with her. So if you want to go to interviews with experts on my website, what's the website? It's thewaytobe.org and look at interviews you can watch. And Erica, Dr. Shelley, is there and she'll tell you everything about it. And I do have them, but I have to put myself on report. I have not put them on my beehives yet. So that's kind of bad. All right, so we're still going to go with questions that were submitted during the past week. It's only fair that we answer those. And then those of you who have questions for me, please type them in all caps. It's not shouting here, just for today. And I'll try to get to your questions after we get to the regular ones, and unless something is really pressing and you need to know something right this minute. So white clover, by the way, they're on it. Raspberries, they're wrapping that up. So the raspberries are already fruiting out pretty heavy and everything. So also our mulberry trees are really loaded this year. Not a great deal for the bees. The linden tree, which has been fantastic for the bees, is wrapping up now. It looks like we're going to get about another day or two out of those, but it's great to track them. And the bees are really going nuts for milkweed right now. And you can smell the milkweed far before you get to it. We have a pretty windy day. You probably want to know how fast the wind is moving. 4 miles an hour, because I checked the anemometer before I came in. See, I care about you. I want you to know what's going on in my world, regardless of what's going on where you are. But I hope things are well. I hope that your bees did not get flooded out. Some people got more than 6 inches of rain in an hour. I don't even know what you do about that. So I want to thank everyone for being here. And I want to thank Keith for being my bouncer. If anybody acts up, he's going to show you the door, but he's going to be nice about it. So you may not even know that you've been silenced. So the first question for today comes from Randall in Shelbyville, Tennessee. It says, I heard you speak previously about the benefits of 5-frame nukes for building comb. And I'm interested in producing comb honey and would like to see your nuke setup. And I'd like to use it. My question is, what launch tray do you use in the bottom? You spoke about one previously. Okay, so this is really simple. They're not lunch trays. The nucleus hives we're talking about, I prefer the wooden ones. I have several that I'm testing right now. I have to say that when it comes to the nukes, I do have a favorite, and it's not even my own wooden nuke. Apame nucleus hives are performing extremely well. They're expensive though. So if you want to save money, get the wooden ones. So I use the 5-frame all deeps. I buy the screen bottom boards that are available. I'm not sure where he got them, maybe Dadant or something like that, because they already had a screen bottom board built. Now, I don't leave open screen bottoms on any of my hives, but the way those came, they have sidewalls that are nice and tall and deep enough to accommodate a tray if all I do is put a solid wooden bottom board underneath. So that's what I did. And I bought sandwich trays. Plastic sandwich trays, you can get them on walmart.com, you can get them at Amazon. They were really inexpensive if I can keep my wife from taking them and using them for actual sandwich trays. That would be a good thing. They slide right in. They're a great fit for the thing, the way it already is set up. And they're also compartmentalized for sandwiches. So guess what? If you have moisture dripping down into them, or you get to see exactly where the Varroa destructor mites fall in, and then they don't just all run to one end if you've tilted your hive forward, right? So they're called sandwich trays. You can look those up and you find out they fit perfectly underneath the nuke. And by the way, this idea of using a nucleus hive, third level or fourth level, even although I don't go to the fourth level, third level is your comb building level. It's nice and warm up there. It's insulated and they draw out comb really well, which means it's also great for comb honey. So if you want to put some foundationless frames, that's what I would recommend. I do have the Ciracel Ross Round clips that will take the Ross Round frames and you can put those up as a deep frame. You can fit 3 or 4 of those in a 5-frame nuke. And but you have to use only those frames if you do that. So my preference is, and I'll explain why, foundationless frames in the top of the nukes if you're going to make cut comb. And that's because let's say they don't do so well and they only get it half done or they draw them out, 60% or something, then there's no loss. We haven't put some mechanism out there that we have to take out at the end of the year. Instead, we have this nice frame of comb that they've built themselves and they've drawn it out, and then you just cut the comb. So that's it. Works really well. And if any hive is going to do that, those are going to do it, because that's like taking a 10-frame deep single brood box and then just putting a super right over the top of it because it's 5/5/5, and then they build out the top, and then you take that off, and don't forget to leave them lots of time at the end of the year to recover from that. So for me, that's mid-September. So after mid-September, we don't pull anything off our hives here, and we let them recover from the honey harvest that we've done. Some of you don't have a late summer honey harvest, but I'm talking regionally. So Northeastern United States, state of Pennsylvania, we get a second one. So here's all caps here. Is there a way to calibrate a refractometer without access to a high dollar one? Yes. Okay. And that question comes from A. Mull. Anyway, every refractometer, first of all, what is a refractometer for those who are watching and wondering what we're talking about? It refracts light. So light either reflects, normal incident angle, refracts, comes in at an angle, and then angles through it, or transmits direct, right? So refracting shears the wave, shears the light wave. I know that's more than you want to know, but refractometers are designed for you to hold it up to a light, and it determines the water content of the honey. So the directions regarding how to calibrate it come from the company that makes it. So each refractometer, you should pick one that's marked for honey, water percentage in honey, and follow their instructions. Some of them use extra virgin olive oil, some of them use distilled water. So each manufacturer has their own setup. I will say this, if you want to read that thing clearly, you want to make sure to cover the entire plate before you close the top. Don't leave any air sections in it at all, because unless you cover the plate entirely, your line of water percentage is going to be kind of fuzzy. So covering the entire plate makes it clear. Now I use the Misco refractometer that comes from the company. It is digital and it is calibrated by the company, and they sell them specifically for honey refractometers, and those are what the inspectors use. Are about $360. If you get one that does more than that, the prices just go up. But here's what I recommend. A lot of you belong to bee clubs and things like that. I do. I belong to the Northwest Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association, so I'm going to give them a shout out. It would be great if your bee club got one for you. And then you had what we do. Now I bought my own, but we have a bee breakfast, and we just tell everybody, bring your refractometers in, and we'll calibrate them all from that one. So if you're not comfortable using extra virgin olive oil or whatever else they've gotten, then contact an inspector. Contact a food inspector and see if they won't let you come and check with them. But that's it. They're dirt cheap. Refractometers are, you get the manual ones, $25 to $45. And I tested a little electronic one that works with your watch that I didn't like. But if you go to my YouTube channel, Frederick Dunn, and up in the little search thing, you type in refractometers, you'll see the comparison. And I will say this, once they're calibrated, they're pretty solid. So what else do we have? Craig is in all caps here. Just got an a Lyson polystyrene hive. Do you have a way to use instant vape without melting it? Thanks. Yes. So for Craig, the instant vape, by the way, for those of you who don't know, I have those. I have the Laura Bees vape. They're hot. They deliver through a tube, a 1/4-inch tube, and you can't put them on plastic hives. And Lyson is a polystyrene hive. Apame is also another issue. Get yourself a piece of cork. Now, I also found wooden dowel rod works. So, piece of wooden dowel rod that's nice and long, drill a hole through the center before you cut it up because it's much more difficult to handle it once it's cut. And drill that 1/4-inch hole into a dowel rod, then cut the dowel rod off, put that onto the end. And now you can put it right up against your Lyson hive and vaporize without melting the hive. That's a really good way to go. So, yep, and that works. They also sell one. I think it's nylon or something. It might even be something else that's just high temp tolerant. But I noticed that the one that comes from Laura Bees kind of sticks onto your instant vape, which is what they sell, the battery powered one, and it might be hard to get it off later. So wooden dowel rod works. Cork also works. So you're just going to have to be creative. Anything that keeps it from direct contact, it still shoots the oxalic acid vaporization right in there. Now here's from James Anderson. Fred, do you store your supers wet or dry? Do you use any products to keep moths away during storage? I don't use any products to keep moths away during storage. Here's my method for storing drawn comb. So once it's done, I do let the bees clean it up a little bit. And Robert says, why are you guys yelling in chat? Robert, here's the thing. They're not yelling. I have asked people to type in all caps, and that's so that I know the difference between everyone saying hello to one another or chatting with one another and someone who has a question just for me. So just for today and just in live stream, it's not yelling. It's to get my attention. So nobody's being rude. But yeah, and I don't put any mothballs or anything to prevent, the wax moths from getting in there. Wax moths hate air movement. If you even have one of those little 4-watt fans that just keep some air moving through your supers, those are great. And I've never had wax moths go after my stored stuff unless it was like a dead out and I didn't get it cleaned up and there's, pollen in there and a lot of other things that are left over. That kind of draws them in. But the bees clean them up, rinse them, dry them, store them, and you're good to go. I also found in the past that I could stack the boxes full of frames and put a garbage bag between each box. So these big industrial garbage bags, you could get 3 medium stacked garbage bags between each one. So if something happens in one of those, boxes, if something gets in there, it's not going to have access to all of your frames. So let me find out. So yeah, they're semi-dry when they go in. Now I've got, this is from Den B. A hive to swarm 2 weeks ago, checked them in 10 days. They were drawing out foundation 2 days later. They're all gone. Why would they leave? That's called an abscond. They didn't like where they were and they found a better place to be. Another thing, sometimes you get these young virgin queens in there that even though you hive the swarm, she's actually still scooting around a little skittish. If she leaves, they all leave because they're only going to stay while she's there. Particularly if it's a new hive setup, you don't have any way to put in, say, a frame of brood or something like that. Absconding can be very common. So now I'm going to keep moving here. Illuminate sent in a question. I'm in Northeast Ohio, made a split with 3 solid frames of mostly capped emerging brood. Lots of bees. I framed, one frame had 2 ready to emerge queen cells that came from the same hive I took the split from, and was a very strong split in a jester box. Frames had outer perimeter of honey. I added a frame of pollen, frame of foundation. Also, I added a pint of 1-to-1 jar feeder sugar syrup. The next morning, June 26th, they were being robbed out of the capped honey. My question is, do queenless splits get robbed out easily this time of year? So robbing can happen at any time. Bees are opportunists, and especially if you've got large colonies around, they're the robbers. It's very rare to have a small colony that's just struggling along rob someone else. Those are the ones that get robbed. Now, I have noticed this. If they're missing a queen, this is why we need to be very aware of our queen status in our hives. You see low activity on the landing board. You also see very low defenses, few guard bees on the landing board. This makes it very easy for bees that don't belong there to scoot right in and check things out. If they check things out and they find that you've got sugar syrup or something like that in there, they seem to not have heart. They just don't seem to be able to defend the colony against raiders. So if you had a queen right colony, they seem much more capable of defending and interested in defending. Because that's the other thing. We just talked about this with Steve Rapaski, who wrote the book Swarm Essentials. And colonies without a queen can be completely taken over by another colony of bees. They're that much of a pushover. So the time they get a little feisty is if they've been queenless for a long time, and that's not the situation here with Illuminate. What happens is if they've been queenless for a long time, you end up with laying workers. Laying workers do become a little bit defensive, and that can become a hot hive, and they can defend themselves on the landing board. But that's about 3 weeks out from the time you first lost your queen. So that intermediate period, if they're not producing a replacement, they do, and they stop building infrastructure, and they stop investing in their hive, and it's sad, but that's true. They are less defense capable than a hive that's queen right. Let's take a look here. Ian from the UK says, a farmer's mom and brother stung by bees where my 10 hives are all, let's see, where my 10 hives are. All hives are fine during inspection with smoker. How do I work out my problem hive? Okay, so this is finding out. This is from Ian in the United Kingdom. Some bees are stinging your neighbors and you've got a hot hive somewhere. How do you figure out which one it is? This is the easiest way to find out which of your hives is a troublemaker. Get yourself a leather glove, a real leather glove that really smells like cow leather. And you take that and you hold that in front of each of the hives. This is one of the things that they used at Cornell to determine defensiveness in each hive, pulled the covers off of the hives, and then went along with this strap of leather to see how many stings it would solicit, and a different strap of leather for each hive so that we weren't, of course, carrying out that alarm pheromone that would be there when the stings were present. And so it was cow's leather that they were the most defensive toward. So if you wanted to take it a step further, use something that's black, furry, and also leather, and strap those things together and wave it in front of your hive, see which one's going to attack. I went to evaluate a situation like that once, and all I had to do was sit directly in the flight path of a hive, and I found out quickly which one it was that was super defensive. So that's kind of the benchmark test. So you can do that. I recently talked with Steve Rapaski again. You can see that interview. It's going to launch tonight. And he had someone that was being attacked by bees when normally they were very calm. And after a lot of Q&A, he figured out that the guy was eating a lot of bananas. Now, I personally don't know anything about bananas getting your bees upset, but he had banana breath. Now, why would your bees know that he had banana breath? Because he was looking at his frames and he was looking at the brood frames. And in order to get the bees out of the way so he could see things, he was also looking for the queen. He was blowing them off the frames, which is a very common thing to do. But the fact that he had been munching on bananas apparently excited the bees more than normal, and they attacked him. So it's just another thing. I'm not saying that that would work. I'm just saying that that was an interesting anecdote, that if someone had eaten bananas, that blowing banana breath on bees would make them upset. So it did get the wheels turning a little bit if you want to find out if bananas upset the bees, eat some bananas, not just sit in front and eat the banana, but eat bananas and then blow on them with your banana breath and see what happens. But that's it. So I hope Ian works things out because we don't need neighbors being stung. Papa Z's bees. I have 2 6-frame flow hives. Both of them have all the frames capped except the front edge of the outer frame. I can look through the side windows and see all capped. Should I harvest all frames? That's a common thing. Not only that, there's a question about that from Liz here today. Same thing. So here's the thing with the flow hives, they have the window, there's a panel on one side, and then there's a panel you can see across the back. And if they're like 80% capped, I have found that the water percentage in those capped frames is just fine. You do need to be prepared. Here's the advantage to that, though. Um, Another person sent me a very elaborate manifold that they made where they had all of the frames connected through 90-degree elbows. And then they had this big manifold that put them all together and then drain them all together into a single bucket so they could run it like a kind of like a milking machine, but it's gravity fed. I personally did not like that. And the reason is I want to go frame by frame. That's one of the advantages of the flow hive is you get, if it's full, half a gallon per frame. And particularly this time of year, we're just transitioning from nectar sources to new nectar sources, right? So each frame will have its own floral dominance, right? So we would have just come out of, let's say the linden tree provided a lot. You would have really light, lemony honey coming out of that. And I would want to preserve that in the frame that was filled during that time frame. So I don't like to run them all together. So the beauty of that is you can be draining the one that you think might have a high water content without impacting any of the other frames and have your refractometer sitting with you right there and check it while it's coming out. See what's going on. And if it turns out that it's 19 or 20% moisture, mark the jar that it went into and set that one up for immediate dehydration. I recommend that every backyard beekeeper have some kind of tented, draped area where they can run a dehumidifier. The dehumidifier takes the moisture out of the air while providing warmth. It runs it right into the 90s, and it works really well to take it down about a percentage of water every 24 hours. That's what I do. So you can test it while you're right there. So I hope that answers the question. And now PMJ James says, also Frederick, can you please in the future add a waiting room 10 to 15 minutes before the stream? I wasn't sure it was going ahead. Thank you. Okay, set up a waiting room. I'm not super spiffy on all this stuff, but I'll do that. Waiting room. I don't know. Can you do a waiting room and a live stream on just straight YouTube? That's what I do. This isn't like Streamcast or whatever, but I'll look into it and find out how to make a waiting room, and we'll do that. So moving right along. Craig says, have you had a chance to read the article in the American Bee Journal from Randy Oliver, test of probiotics? I have not. That's the American Bee Journal. I get that too. I wonder why I didn't see that. I will look that up. So anyway, yeah, so we just talked about Flow Supers. There you go. Checking them for moisture. Look to see that they're capped. You also have to watch out sometimes that when you get into a semi-dearth period, even though everything's capped and the ends are all capped up, they might eat a little arc right up into the center frame in there. So you kind of need to be aware of that could be either producing less honey because you're expecting half a gallon, but instead you get, a quart and a half or something like that. And sometimes they will have gone back and consumed some of that stored honey, and then they backfill it again later in the year. So there are some things to watch for. But thanks for that post about the article. All right, now Papa Z's Bees is in the house, and I have a question right here. I'm using your visor design, and the bees are up under it when they beard. Question though, what do you use for a visor on your Apame hives? I don't think your basic design will work for them. Will it? No, it won't. And I wouldn't want to put my hive visors because they have thumb screws on them, and I count on the metal screw digging into the wood to hold the visor in place. And for those of you who don't know, the Apimaye hives are plastic and they have polystyrene inside, and they're very durable hives. But here's the cool thing that I noticed about them. So if you want to put a visor on one, uh, they have handles on every box that flip right out and that you can tie things to. So I would suggest running some kind of wire or something and just hooking to those handles and letting your visor hang out at an angle and then stick out from the front. I don't have anything like that right now. And we were just commenting that when we looked at, because we're in a big nectar flow right now. And when we're looking at all the hives that were really bearding up, some of the hives were really wearing the bees. They're just, the whole front is covered in bees. And we noticed the Apimaye hives had very few bees actually on the front of them, and they weren't bearding underneath either. So I think all the insulation that comes with the Apimaye hive, and I don't use all the vents they have. They have little wheels, two on the front, two on the back. They're vented through the top until the bees get going and seal it up with propolis. But I noticed the Apimaye hives do a very good job of allowing the bees to control that interior climate. They're expensive hives, but I'll tell you what, they do a good job of allowing your bees to control the climate. But if I wanted to put a visor on there, I think I would find some way to hook it to those side handles and just hang it that way. I think that would be a good way to go. So Papa Z's bees. Let's see. Any other questions here for me? And it's great for you all to talk to one another. And the preset questions. The question here is from PMJ. Can anyone please tell me how these preset questions get to Frederick? Yes. You go to my website, which is thewaytobe.org, which is also fredsfinefowl.com. There's a page there marked The Way to Be, and people type in their questions on the form, and you can provide all the information you want or not. You don't have to give your email. You don't have to tell me who you really are. You can just post your question, and that's how it's going to work. So next question comes from Buck and B, and it says, I'm studying factors that determine temporal division of labor in a colony. I came across the idea of a reserve pool of resting workers that can react to deleterious conditions such as pest damage, predators, or discovery of an abundant nectar source. My question is, do you know this to be the case? It's the first I've heard of a resting reserve pool, and my resource is from 1987. Any more recent findings? Yes. This takes me right away to information about honeybee biology that is by Dr. Thomas Seeley. One of the ways that we find out about this pool of resting bees, and a lot of people don't have observation hives, I understand that. We have several of them here, and we do see a big surplus of bees that are parked. They're just doing nothing. They're up in the top of the hive. They could also be collected for those who use slatted racks. Sometimes they're under the slatted racks. You'll see bees that come in from the outside and they go to the dance floor to do their waggle dance or provide whatever information they're providing about whatever resource they've found. It could be water, it could be pollen, it could be nectar. And sometimes they don't need whatever they're presenting. In some cases, a water forager, for example, comes back, and the bees that inspect the water forager are not interested in getting water from it. So where does it go? It goes up in the top and it just parks with its cargo of water. There are also a bunch of bees just held in reserve. And then there are what I call cheerleader bees that come along. And when something shows up on the dance floor that the hive needs, maybe it's an excellent source of nectar. Maybe they discovered that they can rob out their neighbors. So someone's coming back and they waggle and they decide that they need this information. You'll see them do some trophallaxis. They'll check that out. Trophallaxis is when they stick their tongue out and taste what they're bringing in. And if they decide they want it and there's an abundance of it, how do they know there's a lot of it? A lot of cycles of the same waggle dance going over and over from one excited bee that's really cheerleading for that. And then they go back up to this reserve pool of bees and they start grabbing them and vibrating them one by one. And then you'll even see them stick their tongues out. Well, what are you waking me up for? What's going on? They taste it a little bit. Now they get animated. Now the bees are coming down and they're paying attention to the waggle dancer, and then off they go. And the more they come back with the same information, even more come out. So they do have a source of inactive bees that are often just waiting to have a job. So same thing can happen when you get the alarm pheromone. These are older bees that have been outside. They're more than capable of defending the colony when there's a threat. So same thing, there is a reserve, and it's evident in observation hives. Best way to see it. So it's really interesting stuff. Let's see. Brenda making 2 queen excluders out of plastic to give queen a brood break. I have top bar hives. So, okay, this is Keith Spillman, I think, answering somebody. Let me move on. This person doesn't have a name. It just says 4:30 p.m. A friend of mine lost his queens in 2 hives twice because of honey-bound hives. No evidence of eggs, larvae, or brood. All capped honey and open nectar. He didn't have extra drawn comb. What does he have? I guess is the rest of it. You don't want your hives to be honey-bound. Here's one of the problems. Although it's extremely rare for them to completely fill out the whole hive, when you have a laying queen, they tend to reserve the brood area just for your laying queen. Sometimes when you've lost your queen or there's been a swarm or something has happened to her, that's when you see them start to backfill in right into the brood area because the rest of the hive can become honey bound. And this is a big trigger for swarming. So they have no place else to store resources. Also, with a bunch of fresh nectar coming in, this is where the beekeeper has to be ahead of that and provide extra supers. And here's the problem with a brand new beekeeper. The extra supers that you put on last minute because there's a big nectar flow suddenly happening cannot have just undrawn foundation or just undrawn foundationless frames because they're in no mood at that time to build new infrastructure. So you need to provide them with drawn comb so they can immediately go to filling it with its resources available out in the wild there. So there are some things that you can use. There's something called Better Comb, which is already drawn out comb. When you're brand new, here's the key. You have to stay ahead of your bees. So for example, if you had an 8 frame deep that you're building onto, and 6 out of those 8 frames are full of resources, that's when you get the super on ahead of time before they filled all the frames. Once they filled all the frames, there are different dynamics going on inside the hive. Very difficult to convince them to stick around. But also, I'd like to say it's very rare to see them close up an entire brood area, even when they're backfilling all the other available space. So that's actually kind of a warning when you're doing your inspection. If you look at the brood area and you find that even what should be brood for your queen to lay, cells for your queen to lay in, you find that even that's full of resources and nectar, then there may be a problem with your queen. So it's another thing you want to watch out for too. Because, for example, I have observation hives that are small. They just cycle up and swarm out, cycle up and swarm out. They never backfill their brood 100% unless something's wrong with the queen. Now, I'm not going to say it's 100% of the time, but it is something to be concerned about. You may not have a good queen in that hive. So expand your hives ahead of the nectar flow and try to have as much drawn comb as you can. And while you've got colonies that are drawing comb, use them to draw surplus comb. Keep it going, keep them building, and then you can store those things. It's incredibly valuable to have frames of drawn comb for any of the colonies that you have that might be expanding before you can catch it. Because then if you can put drawn comb above them, or even pull a full frame out of honey and drop that comb that is not yet full of honey down into that spot, they get an immediate sense that there's space available, and we can start to cut off what may be a plan to supersede the queen, or of course to produce swarm cells. And then once they start that, the train is rolling. So I hope that helped. Let's see. What is going on? A friend of mine lost his queens. Okay, we just did that one. This is from Nancy Tasker. It says, bees refuse nectar or pollen from foragers when it is not good for them, or do they ignore the incoming bees? Do bees refuse nectar or pollen from foragers when it is not good for them? Now, they are picky, by the way. Foragers sometimes get into stuff they shouldn't. And when they come back, it's up to the nurse bees to accept what they have. And you're going to see something called the tremble dance. When they come in and they have something that bees inside the hive have taste tested and decided is something, either they don't need it or something that isn't quite right, they don't want it. You'll see a bee start to tremble and go all over the hive, trembling and shaking and going and trembling and shaking. That bee has brought a resource back that it cannot get a storekeeper bee to take from it and put into the cells. Because keep in mind, the bees that go out and get nectar that fly into the hive, they have to have an interior worker accept that nectar from them, and then that worker puts it into the cell. And if there's something wrong with it, or they just don't need whatever it is they have, they won't take it from them. And that's when you see these trembling bees going all over. It's like, I'm full, help me, help me. And they don't take it. So determining that something's wrong with it, I don't know what would be wrong with it. If it's sugar based, they go nuts for it. But again, they could be out of space. There could be a lot of things going on. But that's then when you end up with a surplus of bees in there that have a bunch of full honey crops that they can't empty. And so they sit there until they consume it or until it is back in demand. So it's very interesting. Also, there are bees. Now, there's another behavior that lets you know that what they're bringing in isn't good for the bees, and they actually protest the dance. So when the waggle dancer comes in and they don't like what they've brought in and they want them to stop advertising what they brought in, it gets beeped. So you'll see a little worker bee actually ram the side of the waggle dancer to interrupt the waggle dance. And they also make, to us, it's an audible beep. So it's like, and you hear, and then if it starts to waggle again, they interrupt it and ram it again and make this little beep, which of course the beep is something we hear. The bees don't hear it. The bees feel the vibration. And then that waggle dancer gets shut down and has to go and can't do that. Now, there are a lot of reasons why they do that. One is they don't like what they're selling. The other is super interesting, and that is the fact that where they've got the forage from may no longer be available, or it may be unsafe to go there. So that beeping and interrupting of a waggle dance from a forager becomes suddenly very interesting because they've actually done tests where when the bees went to a source that they established, of course, scientific study, when they establish it and the forager shows up, they were doing little grabs at the bee, like threatening it. And then when that bee went back, it realized that it was in jeopardy, that it was harassed, and that something was wrong with that resource now. And so that bee would go back and interrupt any other bee that also tried to advertise that location. So they're also doing it to warn that it's a dangerous place to forage now. Super interesting stuff. So, Brenda, question about queen excluders was my question to you, Fred. I must have asked it wrong or in the wrong area. Sorry. Uh-oh. So what was the question about queen excluders? Where is the queen excluder question? Oh. So is there a timestamp from Brenda about the queen excluders? If you give me somebody can just tell me the timestamp, I can go right to it and find out what the question was. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to Deb Brown right here, new beekeeper here. If you do that and have drawn comb, where do you store that? Where do I store the drawn comb? I make racks for my drawn comb. They're just open air racks. And if you are brand new to beekeeping, I highly recommend that you get yourself an enormous storage area for all your bee equipment, as much as you can possibly take over. And set up racks for your frames, because you'll want to classify your frames just by age, or if they've been used for brood, or if they're just for honey and things like that. And to have racks to store them, and air movement there. Open air keeps pests away from them. So dark spaces that don't get, of course, it can't be out in a shed that's going to get 120 degrees midsummer, because your comb can actually get too soft. But yeah, you have to think about where to store your comb. And some people don't like this, but there's an expensive tote called the Hive Butler. And Hive Butler totes, which are going to last you forever, are a great way to store and organize also your frames after you've extracted them, or if you've got drawn comb that you just want to keep protected, because the Hive Butler totes have slats in between them, so even the frames can't bump into one another while they're in the tote. and they handle deep frames. And of course, that means they also handle mediums. And there's enough space between them that if you've got frames that have queen cells, queen cups, things like that, some irregularities in the comb, it has room for that also. So I like those two, and I stack them 5 totes high, so that's 50 frames. So Nancy Tasker says beeping is what it's called. Yes, it is called beeping. Beeping the dancers. Let's see what else. I think I'm okay. 429 was the question. So let me go back up there. Oh, Brenda making 2 queen excluders out of plastic to give queen brood a break. I have top bar hives. This is overwintered hive. Should I put wider cell comb they drew out, or does it matter? I don't really understand the scope of the question. It says excluders out of plastic to give the queen a brood break. So you want to, if you want to cause a brood break, this has top bar hives though. So you're going to have to make custom queen excluders if you want to isolate or consolidate your queen down to whatever frames you want her exclusively to produce her brood on. And since top bar hives are pretty unique, often, the interior angles and spaces can have some variance. So a queen excluder, just like Keith has here, the plastic queen excluders are easily cut and shaped, and you could put them into a wooden frame or staple them to a wooden frame that would match that configuration. And then you would consolidate your brood area just to near the entrance, and then beyond that, everything else. But I don't know if it gives the queen, if it's intended to give the queen a break, but definitely control where she's going to lay. And you can limit the amount of brood that you have. But keep in mind, when they run out of space for brood, you can also trigger a swarm. So it's just a balance. And I don't have a top bar hive, but I'm just going to guess on it. So the next one, Jeffrey, Marlboro, New York. For quite a long time, Premier has been selling black deep foundation that is too big to fit into the deep frames, causing the foundation to bow severely. What would the end result be with severely limited B space when bowed towards each other? So if they bowed both frames towards each other, I guess. And then the opposite side, of course, if they bowed away, you have spaces that they would draw out comb. My humble opinion is these frames should be a manufacturer's recall on these deep black frames. What's your opinion? Well, my opinion is I've never received a frame foundation from Premier that was the wrong size. But the good news is they're plastic. It is the thinnest foundation material that is currently being sold for beekeepers in the frames. And it's very easy to clip with shears. Now, I've never had the one, but if I did have them that were bowing a little bit, I would trim it just so that it fits into those slats. There is some give there, and I would just trim it off. I guess the question would be, are other people having the same problem? Is there any chance that it's the wooden frames that might be a little off instead of the foundation? The other thing is I would contact the company and let them know that you received foundation that you believe is sized wrong, and see what's going on there, because they may have to calibrate their equipment, because the way Premier foundation is, when you look at it, it seems like it comes off in one really long continuous sheet, and it's just cut. And I imagine that they're calibrated to cut those exactly right to go right into deep frames or mediums, whatever it happens to be. But I think Premier only sells deep foundation. But Bob Binney had some things to say about Premier foundation as well, but I don't remember exactly what that was. But the good news is it's easy to trim. But I would definitely reach out, let them know. They seem like a very responsive company. So question number 7 comes from Mike from Carmel, Indiana. I know you don't ventilate summer or winter. Do you do anything different when temperatures are in the mid 90s for several days? We do get temps in the mid 90s here. And no, I don't do anything different. The key is to, of course, have an insulated top, insulated inner cover, and the insulated hives, of course, that have insulated sidewalls and things like that will do much better with that. But as long as your bees have access to fresh water, they can definitely control that interior climate. So I don't go into venting and things like that. The other thing is sometimes people get a really hot, run, and I would also caution them about venting suddenly a bunch of your hives, opening the tops, providing air gaps and things like that. If it also happens to be a very low humidity situation. And the reason I caution you about that is they have put a lot of effort into not only controlling the humidity in the hive to cool things down, but they want to keep the humidity in the hive up so that their brood, their open brood, is protected because desiccating that would be a huge problem. Drying it out is a huge problem. So even in very hot climates, in some instances, venting out the top is also taking away the humidity that your bees have worked so hard to bring in, and they have no problem cooling it down. So when they'll paint, the water bees will come in and they'll spread water all over. They'll paint it with their tongues all over the surface of the brood area, and then other bees will be fanning that, and through evaporation, they're cooling and controlling that interior climate. And don't forget that your brood area is 94 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit anyway. So letting your bees control the humidity in there is going to be critical to making sure that they're not drying out when they're in their larvae state. So they're being fed, and there are some concerns there. So Ed's Bee says, do you harvest your Layens frames? I have both Layens and Langstroth hives, but no Layens extractor. Do you cut comb systems work with Layens frames? Yes, cut the comb. That's all I can do because I don't have an extractor. And as I've said in the past, if I were buying them again, because if you go to Dr. Leo's website, horizontalhive.com, and he has an extractor that accommodates the Layens frames. And if I had just bought that, then it would also handle the Langstroth frames. So I would have a tool that works on all frame sizes, but I didn't. I have an extractor that's set up just for deep. The largest frame it accommodates is the deep Langstroth frame. So other than that, cutting the foundation and making cut comb, you can also uncap it and you can drain it yourself. So there's strain and drain, there's crush and drain. And Dr. Leo has a bunch of instruction on different ways to harvest honey from your Layens frames. But it is good for cut comb. It often gets wavy and thicker in some areas, thinner in others, which actually makes your cut comb that much more interesting. And then, of course, leave the edges, the beeswax around the edges, and they'll build that again right from those all over again. So that is now my cut comb, the hot things from Pierce Manufacturing that I use in my shallow and medium frames does waste a lot if you're going to cut your comb because of the vertical wires that are in those Layens frames. So just cut it out with a knife, I would recommend. You can do anything you want, but without an extractor, cut comb is like number one. If you're going to crush and strain it anyway, why not have cut comb? Except that some people don't like it. So there's some people don't know what to do with comb. So I was talking with my supervisor, my 8-year-old grandson. He has comb honey still, and he's got a waiting list for his regular honey. And he cannot get people to take the comb honey, which is actually really unique. So I suggested to him that he teach them how to eat cut comb. So that you should cut a bazooka bubblegum sized piece of comb with honey in it and put that on cheese and that on a cracker and eat it with a cheese and cracker. Then you're actually eating it and it tastes really good. For those of you who have never tried that, I highly recommend you take your comb honey, cut it, put it on your favorite cheese, on a cracker, eat it in one bite, and you will find out that it's an entirely different experience than just taking cut comb in a cube and chewing that and then spitting out the beeswax later. So it actually works really well, and that's a great way to eat it. And I believe it was Rusty Burlow who published an article about how people should be eating that. And I thought that was a great idea. We tried it and it worked really good. So that's for the Layens frames, no extractor. And Christopher says, are there any companies that make small cell plastic foundation? I don't know right offhand, but I guess the question you have to ask is, what do you want small cell foundation for? If the cells are smaller, they have to make more cells in the same frame. Some people, there are entire groups that have gone into regressing their bees and getting them to be smaller and using small cell foundation. And the thinking was that it would reduce Varroa destructor mites' ability to reproduce in the cell, that there wouldn't be room for them. And that led to a whole course of scientific study, actually, where they went with small cell foundation, they went with small cell comb, they did regress the bees, and they wanted to find out then if the Varroa destructor mites were reproducing at the same rate that they would in larger size worker cell foundation. And the findings were that the differences were insignificant, that those studies from Cornell University and others determined that the Varroa destructor mites reproduced at the same rate, and small cell foundation did not have an impact on that. So then the next question I would have is, why would you push them into small cell foundation? You could go foundation less, have no foundation, and just let the bees build the cells the size that they want. So it's been studied, it's been looked into. Dr. Tom Seeley did a whole thing about it. And so if it's small cell foundation as a part of natural Varroa control, that has not been shown to make a significant difference. So companies, one of the companies that claimed they had smaller cells or more cells per frame was Premier. And I got those and I matched those up with Acorn frames. And I did a video on that if you want to see it. Acorn versus Premier foundation. And it was actually the Acorn foundation that had more cells per frame than Premier did. So they turned out not to be necessarily smaller cells. And so once again, they all just work. Heavy waxed foundation if it's plastic, and normal worker cell works just fine. So here is from Ramak Attack. First year beekeeper in Arizona, can you still split hives during the summer dearth if both hives are fed syrup and patties? Thank you. You can. It's a very expensive endeavor. So if you want to know, if you're in an area where you have a dearth, it's an uphill climb because the bees cannot recover on their own. You're going to have to feed and care for them. And of course, there are protein patties, pollen patties out there. And in fact, Hive Alive put out some really good pollen patties this year that are working really well for those that need to build something up in the absence of actual resources in the environment. But I highly recommend that people work in concert with what the environment is providing. And if you do need to make a split just because a colony is so productive and you have to kind of get them under control, there's nothing wrong with that. And then I would just feed the smaller version of your split. So whatever you took off and started anew is the one that I would be feeding sugar syrup. When you get into the pollen and stuff like that, because I even asked the companies that make the pollen patties, what are the pollen sources that you put in? And they'll say things like California pollen. I said, right, but what were the tree and what were the flower sources, or, what was the source of the pollen? And they actually don't know. So it's very interesting. We know that all pollen is not the same. And so just ask a lot of questions when it comes to pollen patties and things like that. I also prefer, if I were going to try to keep colonies going in a period of dearth, profound dearth, I would think about having an open pollen source for them somewhere and use even pollen substitutes, which have proven to work in periods of dearth. So AP23 has worked really well as a pollen substitute. Mega Bee pollen substitute has worked really well during periods of dearth. And for those of you who need to keep things growing and going. So, and then provide separate sugar syrup. I've never been a fan of piling it all together in some kind of super mixture and then using that to get your bees really going. So provide free choice, pollen substitute over here. Real pollen, I have questions about, you'd want to see testing. So always ask wherever you're getting your pollen patties from or your protein patties, what kind of testing has been done? What kind of evidence do we have that this is going to really boost my bees? They're never going to match what they can find foraging in an area when there is a resource going on. So if we're pushing against the natural rhythm of the environment, I think that's just going to be an uphill climb always. So, but you can do a split if they're huge, but it isn't a time that I would be trying to increase just because I need more colonies or want more colonies, I wouldn't try to do that by feeding to do it. I would just use these pollen subs and things like that to get bees to reproduce so they don't just starve out and use 100% of what they have. And I want to thank Ian from the UK for 4.5 pounds. Thank you so much. Money from my first jar of honey. Good on you. That is great. Okay, so so I don't do anything different when the temperatures are in the 90s. Question number 8, moving on here. Says Susan from Cartersville, Georgia. 2 weeks ago, a crop duster treated the fields that surrounded our property. Today, I see a huge number of dead bees, tongue sticking out, backs arched, back legs extended. The hives are not dead, but are definitely weakened down. Do you have suggestions for building them back up? I'm trying to find out who, why, and when again. Okay, so for Susan, the first part of this crop dusting incident, check in with the Department of Agriculture. You can be on a list, at least in the state of Pennsylvania where I am, we can be on a list where if there's going to be any kind of pesticide spray near your apiary, you get an alert. So that would be a day that you could put robbing screens on all your hives, keep your bees in. Now I know that, it's already happened and they've already been exposed. So now that we've just talked about feed supplements and things like that, the first thing that came to mind when I saw this is from Strong Microbials, and this is called Direct Fed Microbials, Super DFM. And the reason I bring that up is the purpose of that is specifically for bees that have been exposed to pesticides and things like that. For other beekeepers, if you're not exposed to pesticides and your bees are not under that kind of stress, it probably wouldn't be prudent for you to buy and use that. But Strong Microbials developed that. So if you knew that you were going to be exposed to a certain pesticide, that allows your bees in their gut break that down and not be harmful to the bee itself. So it also gives them a boost. So it's kind of like giving them probiotics. And then, so I would recommend going to their website after you find out what your bees have been exposed to. So now you can't wait that long, right? Because your bees have already shown that some are dying. So my solution is, I never forget this. There was a hospital corpsman while I was in active duty that always said, dilution is the solution to pollution. So the first thing I would do is I would start to feed that hive or the hives that you feel are showing some deficiency. And what would I feed? Sugar syrup. So I would just make sure that they had lots of resources, that they did not have to go out to get them as far as the carbohydrate goes, and do my best to recover the bees that are still there. I've had bees demonstrate symptoms like that, falling off the landing board, tongues extended, everything as you've described. They were exposed to a pesticide. And then ultimately the colony fully recovered. So that was not the bad news. So the other thing is I found out, now that was during COVID. So a lot of the labs weren't doing testing. I had to have 100 samples, 100 bees. I had to store them in alcohol. I had to ship them to a lab to find out what they had been exposed to. And I found that that was not very cost effective. In other words, the information that you're going to get is not going to change the result. So finding out exactly what they were exposed to, unless you've lost, a substantial loss that you're going to be compensated for, check in with the Department of Ag. Any use of pesticide, farming chemicals has to be registered with your agriculture and your extension office, and they can let you know what was used. And then you can find out what would I need to do to get my bees to recover from that. So that's what we need to do. And Thelma says, how bad is nosema? Okay, that is a weird question right now. Thelma Yule, how bad is nosema? Because my very next question right here is from Kush Trimaju, Kush. And it says, hey, Mr. John, can you please tell us more about Nosema cerana? How colonies get infected, symptoms, treatment. So that's very interesting. Darren is talking about Fred's not safe anywhere. Quinn has arrived. All right, so here's what we have. Nosema, first of all, what is it? Nosema ceranae. There's also Nosema apis. And what it is a microsporidian. It's a living organism. That's a spore that gets into your bees, gets into their midgut, and gets into their digestive system and causes anemia in your bees. It makes your bees not perform as well. It can cut down their longevity, and it's a living thing. Now, I used to count Nosema spores. Hemocytometer, it's a little glass plate that's used for blood cell counts and things like that. And you have to set up your microscope, and you have to get your bees and you put them into a Ziploc bagging, you add fresh water and you crush, well, the bees' abdomens, and you crush up their abdomens. Then you draw the water out, and with everything that's in suspension, you put it on your hemocytometer, and then you're counting those Nosema spores, right? And they're very distinctive. And once you see them and know that that's what it is, then now you'll know what your levels are, and then they're acceptable levels. If you want to know step by step, the very best procedure for checking your bees for Nosema that I found anywhere is at scientificbeekeeping.com, which is Randy Oliver's website. If you get on there and search for counting Nosema spores, he has a step by step. It's great. It's very good. So I learned to do it at Cornell, and they had a very good demonstration, and we had to do it because we had to know how to count for Nosema. Now, what are you going to do about it? Now that we know that it causes anemia in your bees, and usually this happens during winter when they're concentrated, they're inside, so it's spread bee to bee. Sometimes you'll see uh, bee droppings all over the place, and people go, "Oh my gosh, that colony has Nosema. Look at all the diarrhea that those bees have." Well, they're cleansing their hind gut, and they're getting rid of waste material. And it's not that that's an indicator of Nosema, but it is a mode of spreading Nosema spores, right? So your bees spread it, dirty hives, damp hives. This is why spring is a critical time, because they're often stuck inside during bad weather at a time when it's also getting very moist and things like that. And Nosema can start to spread. However, here's the good news, because I always tell you to question everything, find scientific evidence for the claims that people have. And that's when, and by the way, I just got this question at 3:36 p.m. today, but Hive Alive, for those of you who know what this is one of the few supplements that you add to sugar syrup that actually has a proven health benefit to the bees. What does it act against? Nosema. There. So when this Hive Alive, when it first came out, and I was all obsessed with counting, I think I liked the idea of setting up a mini lab on the kitchen table and crushing the bees' guts to see if they had Nosema spores in them, and then finding out later if, when they're given a dose of Hive Alive syrup in sugar syrup, it's 2 teaspoons per gallon. So a thing like this lasts a really long time. And I do have a published study that I found, that I looked to validate what they had done, and also prove that again through backyard science, very low level science, just following these procedures for looking at the spores. A dose is a gallon for the colony. And then a couple of weeks after that, let's do a recheck to look at their guts and see if the Nosema spore counts are down. And there are things that we don't notice immediately. If you see bees dying on your landing board, that's a big thing. Their tongues are out, or they're trembling and they have all these other problems in the grass in front of a hive. Those are alarming things. Nosema ceranae, right, is not, or ceranae, however people want to say it, but the evidence of that impacting your bees is not so conspicuous. I don't know that that bee only lived 4 weeks when it should have lived 6. I don't know that this bee is not foraging as far or as long or as strong as it otherwise would have had it not been impacted in its midgut by Nosema, right? So there are sublethal impacts on your bees. And if you really wanted to deal with it, of course, healthy colonies are going to be healthy. The healthier they are, the more resistant they are. And so, of course, the claim then is that you can use Hive Alive right now is the only thing I know of that you can mix with. And it's as easy as giving them sugar syrup. Now, here's the thing. You're not going to do that with your honey supers on. If you're hoping to collect honey from that hive, you definitely don't want to be putting Hive Alive or sugar syrup or anything supplemental on the hive at a time when you're collecting honey for human consumption later. So you need to be aware of that too. So you can actually test your bees. So if you don't have a microscope, now we're talking about an investment. You need access to a microscope. This is very interesting too. Some libraries will actually let you check out a microscope. So check in with your city library and see what resources are available, and then you just have to buy your slides from Amazon or wherever so that you can do the test. It's very basic. It's very easy to do, and once you see it, you'll never forget it. Uh, Here's the next one. What is your JKD0114? What is your predominant nectar source now? Are you experiencing a dearth? We are not experiencing a dearth. In fact, they're filling things. We are in a nectar flow. So the biggest things, the big two right now, milkweed, there is loaded, it's heavy, and of course the um, clover is everywhere. So the bees are foraging well, and we don't see bees on every clover, and we don't see bees on every milkweed head, which tells me they have other options too. And my grandson and I were just inspecting his hive yesterday, and there's a lot of honey, and they're capping it already. So it's coming in, and we're in a very good nectar flow right now. So that's the good news. And by the way, that was the last question for today that I had pre-submitted. So let's do a last check here. I have Brenda. How is your hive box that was scraped up inside? Are the bees adding more propolis? So this is from Brenda Weideven. We're talking about the propolis hive. And Quinn and I, that's my grandson, we hived a swarm in one of those boxes. Now, I've had propolis hives out of my apiary since before they were announced to the public. So we had them here to see if they would put more propolis on the side walls of the hives. Now, here's the tough part for that. They are propolizing the interior surface of the propolis hives, which comes from Premier, which is a company that we were just talking about, their foundation. So, but the other thing is, my colonies are propolizing everything in other hives too. So it's kind of hard to gauge, is there more propolis because of this hive configuration? They're covering the interior sidewalls. So my other hives, was talking to Quinn, we're pulling apart his flow hive. All the frames are heavily propolized. We got into the long Langstroth hive, and they almost filled the spaces between frames completely with propolis. So their propolis envelope is substantial. So it's really interesting. But so I guess the question is, does the propolis hive, which the propolis, the whole name comes from propolis, and Marla Spivak from the Spivak Lab, University of Minnesota. So they're covered in propolis. The whole interior sidewall of the hive is covered in propolis. So the regular pine boards that normally are not scratched up, they just have a very thin or sparse coating, and we know the corners get propolized really well. And wherever there's physical contact with your frames on those rabbet joints there, that gets propolized. So we do not see a continuous coating of propolis over the entire interior surface of a standard pine box. They do have that continuous propolis surface, and we need to show a video of that. So the next time we get into one of those hives, we'll pull the frames and get a video of the interior sidewall so people can see that. So it did work to encourage them to propolize the entire interior surface. But my colleagues in general are doing a lot of propolizing. So let's see. This is from Lorianne Gray. Hi from South Florida. What is your undershirt? Is it one of your snow? It's not one of mine. This was given out at a conference. I don't know. So I'm going to have to look up the name of it. I just like it because it has a bee and a cog on it. So it's some kind of Apis engineering thing. But that's basically, it's not one of mine. But if anybody wants to look at mine, they're on Teespring. And if you go to my website, thewaytobee.org, look at the store, there's clothes, coffee cups, things like that. So I appreciate that if anybody wants to look there. So the one that's scraped up, it's actually a patented surface, distressing method or something, but it definitely is working. So the next question is, thank you. Are you noticing any brood shutdown? No, brood is booming right now. So again, we're going hive by hive. The pollen is just coming in loads. So they're sustaining themselves. They've kind of hit a homeostasis. They're at a, you know, deep 10 frame box, and then part of the medium box above is brood, and they're just cycling the brood. So in other words, they're filling with eggs, and it's going through the larvae stages, then the pupa state, and then it just repeats. So they're not expanding bigger than that, but they're in a constant state right now of brood production. So we've kind of hit a pretty level, um, you know, number of bees in each hive. So they're maxing out whatever they wanted to do. So Quinn's job was to go around and evaluate and count pollen coming and going from each hive. So coming into the hive, he had to find that each hive had 10 or more pollen loads per minute. And that was yesterday afternoon. And anyone that was not was going to get inspected. And those that did not have 10 pollen loads per minute coming in and were inspected were in fact queenless. So, including Quinn's flow hive, it was queenless and had been queenless for at least 2 weeks, because I also taught him how to look at the brood and find out when's the last time a queen was in production. So we actually collected a swarm that had a queen, and we installed that in Quinn's flow hive, a large swarm, by the way. And they moved right in. The queen moved right in, and the queenless colony is now queen right, and they more than doubled their workforce all in one fell swoop. Now, if we had not done that, looked at them, observed the landing boards, counted the pollen going in, and then looked to see if things were okay inside the hive, because brood production had stopped, but honey production was still in full swing. So they were still capping and drawing out. In fact, we supered the hive and we put the flow super on. So now we fixed them with a swarm that we collected. So good news for Quinn, but and a good lesson too, by the way. So no, in fact, we have more coming, because our big here in the northeastern part of the United States, in the state of Pennsylvania, are actually the biggest nectar flow is still ahead of us. It's going to be goldenrod. You know, the clover and stuff continues all through the summer, and milkweed will eventually come to an end. So the goldenrod, the asters, and things like that. And there's so many different varieties of goldenrod. You'll hear people say, well, goldenrod yields nothing. Well, this variety of goldenrod does. And then we also have ironweed and Joe Pye weed. We have a lot of things that come up at the end of the summer. Our borage hasn't even started blooming yet. That's going to be a big nectar flow. The sunflowers are not necessarily a big nectar flow, but they're a big pollen resource for your bees. And so there are a lot of health benefits that are being assigned to the pollen that's coming from sunflowers. So the sunflowers this year are a success for me. So we have a lot of things ahead, and that's all I can say. Things are going good this year. Didn't look good at the beginning. So this is from David Koch, and he says, do you get more honey with 9 frames versus a 10 frame super? Great question. And the reason is usually yes, and here's why. It's not that you get more honey out of 8 than 10. It's that with the 8 frame setup, they fill all the frames all the way. When you have the 10 frame Langstroth boxes we're talking about, 10 frame deeps, they tend to fill all the frames to the east side. So if I have a south facing hive, all the frames from the east side on are full, but they'll leave those last 2 to the west incomplete. Therefore, an 8 frame deep box is more efficiently used than the 10 frame box, which ends up having, a couple of frames that never quite get finished off. And I did notice, though, when you go up to the medium super, the mediums tend to fill all the way across. But if there's anything incomplete on a 10 frame medium super, it's also that Western box. So 8 frames, easier to lift, easier to manage, and they do make better use of the space. And even Dr. Tom Seeley, when I spoke with him, he's gone to all 8 frame equipment because the same reason. And he's also gone to insulating his hives completely, sidewalls and everything else. So yeah, the 8 frames seem more efficient. It's not that you get more, because we did get that extra half a frame or whatever. But when you're loading your extractor, that's always the uneven frame that goes in there, because only one side of it's drawn out, and the other side's not. So it's not as heavy as the others, and unless you have a really big extractor where that would matter. So Yeah, and I have to say too, some of my favorite hives are the 7-frame Apame hives right now, as far as efficiency and everything else. Um, Affordable queens. This is from JKD0114. Affordable queens. Affordable queens are the ones you find in swarms. I know that's kind of a smart aleck answer, but I like my own queens. I like to cycle back my own stock and queens that you make yourself. Queens that you can do walkaway splits. You can do a lot of things to produce your own queens. And finding a swarm that's got a nice queen, like I did this morning. This morning, I found a queen that was marked, so it was one of mine. So I recovered a swarm that had my own queen in it. So I'm cycling my own stock back. Now, if you're brand new, you're looking for places to get queen bees. And the interesting part of that is, unless you're talking to an actual queen breeder, like for us, the Penn State has a queen breeding program right now. And so they were getting queens for 25 bucks. Um, and reaching out to breeding studies and things like that, but then finding out who's grafting and developing their own queens and who has a good reputation in your area is going to be your best resource. So, and A Mull says, how are my mite counts? Mite counts are suspiciously low. I'm not trusting it, actually. And so we're keeping our eyes on mites, and the same thing with Quinn's oversized queenless flow hive had no mites. And that's interesting because we didn't treat his hive. And those of you may know, in the past, we've used bee weaver queens. I didn't buy in any bee weaver queens last year, and it's due to price, to be honest. They jumped up to like $65 a queen. I used to bring those in and refresh my stock. I'm not a queen breeder. I've just, over the years, have continually sent my drones out, sent my stock out. I had survivor line bees. I did not treat for 10 years. I keep them. And actually, last year was a very good year, very good winter. We lost 2 colonies out of 34 last winter. Um, and so the number of Varroa destructor mites is very small. And I thought we were going to have real problems, and I must have been missing something, but apparently I wasn't. So the question is, would I treat if I have a mite count? Yes. So what would I treat with? Oxalic acid vaporization. And part of that is that when we hive a swarm, when we collect a swarm of bees and we put them in a hive and they haven't yet established capped brood, I do an OAV single treatment and do a mite count afterwards. And even on those, we pulled in a swarm that was from 9 miles from here, and it had suspicions, obvious suspicions, because there was a mite on the thorax of one of those bees. So if they're that conspicuous, we have an issue. And so on the 7th day after hiving it, we treated them, and there was a significant mite drop. So I actually regretted bringing in a swarm from outside of my area, because now I'm messing with my own genetics again. So I'm not going to do that in the future. I didn't need the swarm. So I should have just passed those on to someone else, or I should have established a isolation or a quarantine yard several miles away from my own apiary, because here we've really set it up, and I think we're on our way to very strong, very uh, vigorous bees that are holding their own against a lot of maladies that they would otherwise be subject to. Somebody else says shipping for queens seems outrageous. And it's not just that the shipping the queens, the cost is outrageous. The time of year that you do that can put your queens at risk. If they're exposed to a lot of heat in transit, you can end up with a partially sterilized queen, or a queen that is not as productive as she should be. I'm not saying that will happen, but I'm saying that if you're looking at buying a queen through the mail, um, pay attention to all of the weather situations between you and the shipper, the person that's producing the queen, and try to do that when the temperatures are going to be nominal. Um, I had a UPS driver, not to call him out, but I had a queen coming from the bee weaver family in Texas. He put it on the dash of his UPS truck in the hot sun to keep her warm. We can try to educate those guys, but It's you're much better off if you can figure. I'm at a sustainable level. I will never run out of bees. I know never say never, but I have more than 40 colonies of bees. My target was 10. Um, and we end up wanting to evaluate other hive configurations, other hive designs, and insulation, no insulation, venting, no venting, and things like that. The more colonies I have, the more of those observations on a very minimal backyard level, more of those we can do. Um, and they're just they're doing really well. So I don't know what else to say. And cycling, when you've got good stock, those are the ones that you make your splits from. I don't believe now in resuscitating a tiny colony that's struggling, that's not doing well. A big robust colony that's lost a queen, I'm definitely going to replace the queen because they're good in every other way. But if it's a tiny colony that has issues and challenges, heaven forbid, brood disorders and things like that, they don't get used as stock to reproduce from. So always go with your strongest spring colonies that are doing well in the environment in which you live. So they're adapted. You hear it all the time, locally adapted stock, and make your own queens. Those are free. Swarms are free, and try to get your own. Often people, you find a swarm that's in your own yard on your own property. Chances are it came from your bees. So that's cycling back your own stock. And just keep that going. And then hopefully you'll make friends with your neighbor beekeepers too. And you can all start to keep some good bees. Um, that's all I can say. So, um, so Kennedy says, have had a few collapse this year. So collapses, is that an abscond? Is that a bunch of dead bees on the bottom of the hive? There are a lot of different things going on. And I would want to be able to autopsy a colony that died out completely. You definitely need to figure out what is going on with that. In closing, because we're going to wrap up here, it's been almost an hour and a half, but I do want to mention the same book that I frequently mention that comes from Penn State. It is Honeybees and Their Maladies. This is the Penn State website, extension.psu.edu, and it's the College of Agricultural Sciences and Research. And this is a book that I try to put into the hands of as many new and old beekeepers as I can, because it has valuable photos showing the conditions that you might face and be noticing in your hive. It has treatments. It has cause and effect. You really need to understand what's going on with your bees. And senior beekeepers that have done it for a long time should not be too proud to look into a small handbook like this and realize that there may be something that we haven't seen before, and you can still learn. And we're always learning new things. Keeping your stuff, keeping your bees healthy will solve a lot of your problems. And don't depend on supplements and all these other additives when your bees really don't need it. Those things are there. Dry pollen sub and the supplements that you feed bees and sugar syrup and things like that. If your colony is going to crash, if we've got some weird weather anomaly and there's a dearth and you're going to lose all of your bees because you've got 3 weeks of no rain and just nothing is coming in, I do believe in sustaining and helping your bees survive that. I don't believe in just trying to create a super colony when what you really want is a normal size colony that's in a normal cycle of reproduction that has good health and well-being every time you inspect that colony. And then that's the stock that you continue to work from. So I hope that today, here goes Donna. Let me look at this real quick. Red clover, bees, can you use it or can't? Okay, so this is really interesting. Red clover, some of the clovers, the varieties, the flowers are too deep for our bees. For Apis mellifera, their tongues only go so far. The other thing is nectar production. So white sweet clover is going to be number one, period. If you want to know the value of different floral sources for your bees and other pollinators, because there are bees, bumblebees, that can get to those. The other thing is, recently I was looking at comfrey, and you'll frequently hear people say honeybees can't use comfrey at all. Well, my honeybees were all over the comfrey this year, and the reason is because bumblebees were chewing into the side of the blossom. So the honeybees that normally could not reach that nectar were actually visiting the holes that were made by the bumblebees, and I got video of it, and it's really interesting. And so the honeybees were zipping in and getting nectar from comfrey. So the similar thing could happen with the different clover varieties that otherwise might not be prime as far as their design goes for honeybees. Because keep in mind, there are some varieties of flowers that the honeybee is new to this part of the world. These are non-native bees here, and so a lot of the flowers just are not available to them. So that's where these different clovers and stuff get questioned as far as their value for nectar. The Xerxes Society publishes the nectar value and what species of pollinator would benefit from different floral sources. So that would be a great place to check. But when it comes to clover, if you're setting up clover, if you're going to plant it, white clover, sweet clover is going to be top of my list for your honeybees. So to answer Donna, I hope that helps. And what else? That's it. I think we're going to say goodbye. So if there are no other pressing questions, if you have something on your mind and we're wrapping up too soon, or you're watching this after the live is over, I'm going to invite you to go to the group, The Way to Be Fellowship, which is on Facebook. So I know some people don't like Facebook. They won't go to Facebook. It would be worth joining Facebook just to join that group. 100% free, 100% friendly. And the moderators there don't allow spamming, advertisements, things like that. And you can get a discussion going about whatever is on your mind that has anything at all to do with beekeeping. You can post your pictures there, ask questions. What am I seeing? What have you done? And we don't allow people to be rude or mean to anyone at any time for any reason. So, regardless of your experience level, go there. And I want to thank you for watching today and joining in this live chat. The last Friday of every month, we'll be live from 4 to 5. So, thanks a lot. We went a little long today, but I like the questions. Sounds like everybody's doing pretty good overall. And there is another video that I'm putting up also today, which is an interview that I did with Steve Rapaski, and he is the author of Swarm Essentials. Very good talk there. So that's going to show up also on my, it's a playlist, interviews with experts. So thanks a lot for being here. I hope you guys have a great weekend and that all your bees are doing well. Thanks for being here.